What you are about to understand is not a story about missiles, carrier decks, or the familiar theater of naval confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz. What you are about to understand is something that cuts far deeper, a lesson about the nature of institutional blindness, about the catastrophic distance between bureaucratic certainty and operational truth, and about how the most technologically sophisticated fleet ever assembled can be walked to the edge of destruction not by superior numbers or firepower, but by the ruthless exploitation of its own confidence. Stay with me through the full arc of this analysis, because what unfolds across the gray waters of the Gulf of Oman in these hours is, I would argue, the most complete and instructive demonstration of asymmetric naval doctrine that the 21st century has yet produced. And if the first engagement unsettles you, what comes in the second half will permanently alter how you think about the future of maritime warfare. Let us begin where Western commentary almost never begins, with humility about what we do not know our adversaries know about us. The USS George Washington has been conducting sustained operations in the same patrol corridor for 58 consecutive days. 58 days. In that time, Iranian naval intelligence, systems engineers, and operational planners have been doing something the dominant Western media narrative consistently refuses to credit them with. They have been studying, not reacting, not posturing, studying with the patience and methodical precision of scientists who understand that the most devastating attack is not the fastest or the loudest, but the one that arrives already inside the defensive perimeter before anyone realizes the geometry has changed. The narrative you will hear on cable news frames Iran as a cornered, erratic actor lashing out with whatever it has. What the events of this particular dawn reveal is categorically different. They reveal a military institution that has spent years conducting empirical analysis of how American sailors think, how American automated systems classify contacts, and most critically, how American operational success breeds the precise cognitive architecture that a sufficiently patient adversary can walk directly through. Hold that word, patient. It is the single most important concept in everything that follows. The first act of this morning begins not with a radar alarm, not with a weapons release, but with something that Western analysts will later dismiss with a single word: timing. At 0530, Iranian diplomatic back channels transmit through Omani intermediaries a formal request for a 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire. The proposal is substantive enough to require genuine consideration. It moves up the chain of command aboard the Washington within minutes, and for a crew that has been at sustained combat readiness for nearly 2 months running on compressed sleep cycles, elevated cortisol, and the specific psychological exhaustion that comes not from fear but from relentless vigilance, the possibility that this is almost over does something that no training protocol fully accounts for. It does not make them careless. It makes them human, and while that humanity quietly reshapes the texture of attention across every watch station aboard the carrier, something has already been in the water for 4 days, something placed there not to overwhelm the Washington's defenses, but to be ignored by them. The autonomous underwater vehicle Iran deployed on day was this the of the carrier's patrol is, in my assessment, one of the conceptually purest weapons produced by this conflict. Its sophistication is not in its propulsion, its warhead, or its guidance system. Its sophistication is philosophical. It was designed around a single penetrating insight into the epistemological limits of American anti-submarine warfare. American passive sonar is extraordinarily capable. It was built to find submarines large, complex, mechanically noisy objects moving with purpose and speed. It was built around the assumption that a threat will behave like a threat, that it will generate acoustic signatures distinguishable from the ambient acoustic environment of the ocean. Iranian engineers asked a different question: what happens if the weapon does not behave like a weapon at all? The AUV moves at 3.5 knots, the pace of a slow jog. Its electric drive produces a tonal signature that sits at 31 Hertz, precisely at the boundary between the frequency range that automated classification systems are calibrated to flag and the low-frequency biological and geological noise that those systems are calibrated to ignore. It produces no crew noise, no mechanical complexity, no ballast cycling, moving in a perfectly straight line at a perfectly constant depth on a pre-programmed bearing calculated from 58 days of passive observation of the Washington's patrol geometry. It was not built to evade American sonar. It was built to be misclassified by it, detected, logged, assessed, categorized as non-threatening, and forgotten, to exploit the gap between what the system was designed to find and what this object actually is: almost nothing, traveling toward a precise coordinate at the speed of patience. This is the analytical point that Western commentary has almost entirely failed to engage with seriously. The AUV is not a technological breakthrough. It does not represent a leap in Iranian engineering capability. What it represents is a leap in Iranian understanding, a precise and empirically derived model of how American automated classification systems think, and a weapon purpose built to think differently enough to disappear into the spaces between their assumptions. A T-0247 Petty Officer 2nd Class Yara Osman, 22 months into her sonar rating, on the third hour of a mid-watch that has so far produced nothing Logs a contact, bearing 217, speed 3.4 knots, straight track, consistent depth, no deviation. The automated system classifies it, possible large marine biological, low confidence threat assessment, no action required. Osman notes this. She does not agree with it. She keeps watching. Here is where I want to pause, because what happens over the next 11 hours in this sonar bay is more instructive than anything that occurs in the Combat Information Center above it. Osman does not have the institutional authority to override the automated classification. She does not have the rank to demand an active sonar sweep. What she has is time, attention, and a growing unease she cannot yet name but will not dismiss. A whale shark does not travel in a perfectly straight line. It does not maintain a perfectly consistent speed for 11 consecutive hours. It does not follow a bearing that, when extended forward on the chart, terminates at the predicted position of the carrier's hull at the time of contact's estimated arrival. These are not facts that the automated system is asked to consider. They are facts that a human observer with sustained attention and a willingness to trust her own analysis over the machine's verdict cannot stop noticing. She files a second report at 0519. She files a third at 0704. Each one returns. Classification unchanged. No further action required. At 0831, the contact is zero point 0.6 nautical miles from the carrier's hull. It is inside the minimum engagement envelope of every short-range underwater weapon in the formation. The geometry that defensive doctrine requires the distance, the reaction time, the space to deploy countermeasures, and maneuver has been consumed, not by a sudden sprint, by 96 hours of 3.5 knot patience. The formation is not responding to a threat, it is responding to a crisis built entirely from its own classification process, the Mk-54 torpedo that a dispatch from 60 or drops ahead of the contact's projected track acquires it in 4 seconds. The intercept geometry is workable but not clean. At 0.3 nautical miles, the AUV executes the single evasive maneuver encoded in its guidance architecture, a 75-degree heading change held for 22 seconds. Before resuming its original bearing, the torpedo passes 38 meters astern. The helicopter has no second weapon. The escorts are too far. The acoustic decoys enter the water and broadcast the carrier's signature into the ocean, and the AUV ignores them completely because it was programmed to follow coordinates, not sound. It has no ears. The decoys are speaking to something that cannot hear, and then Petty Officer Osman does something that has no name in the formal doctrine of American naval warfare. She transmits, not a report, not a request, the complete acoustic portrait she has been building since 247, the precise tonal signature of the AUV's drive motor, the specific harmonic intervals of its acoustic cycle, the exact way its sound profile interacts with the thermocline at 52 meters compressed into a targeting parameter set and pushed directly to the sonar system of a second helicopter that has been holding at a distance since 8:33 with a loaded torpedo. And no reliable acquisition solution for a contact this acoustically marginal at this range. Without Osman's characterization data, that helicopter is searching for a ghost. With it, it acquires the AUV in 1.8 seconds. The torpedo runs, the intercept occurs 190 meters from the carrier's hull, the underwater detonation does not breach the Washington. But the pressure wave does what pressure waves do. It travels through water and through steel and through every compartment, flexing a 100,000-ton warship along its length in ways no hull is engineered to flex. Equipment fails in 3 compartments. 6 sailors are injured. 1. Seriously, the ship remains operational. The passive acoustic analysis that Osman conducted over 11 hours, the same analysis her institution formally dismissed 3 times, provides the targeting solution for the cruise missiles that leave the Washington's flight deck 41 minutes later. The coastal launch facility, identified from the drive motor's specific harmonic signature, the engineering facility 160 kilometers inland where the vehicle was built across 3 years of development, both destroyed simultaneously. BY0948, the program is gone. The ceasefire proposal is still sitting in Muscat, and somewhere in the sonar bay, Petty Officer Osman is still at her display, still watching, just in case. But it only gets worse from here, because the AUV was only the first movement in a composition that Iranian planners had been writing for 2 years. The diplomatic opening was not designed for the underwater vehicle alone. It was designed to create a specific atmospheric condition, a fractional softening of institutional attention, within which everything that followed would have the best possible chance of succeeding, before we move to the second engagement, which involves a weapon designed not to defeat the carrier's air defense architecture but to weaponize it. I want to name something precisely, because Western strategic commentary consistently misframes this conflict in a way that produces analytical blindness. The dominant narrative is a story about capability asymmetry, about a vastly superior power and a desperate, limited adversary compensating with cunning and fanaticism, what this morning's events reveal. Is not that narrative. What they reveal is an adversary conducting systematic, empirical, scientifically rigorous study of American systems, identifying the specific structural gap between what those systems were designed to do and what the operational environment actually requires them to do, and engineering solutions that fit inside those gaps with extraordinary precision. This is not desperation, this is methodology, and the refusal of Western strategic commentary to name it as such is itself a form of the institutional blindness that Iran has learned to exploit. The second engagement begins at 0952 with a single radar contact rising from the Iranian coastline, a College Far's variant anti-ship ballistic missile, a type the Washington's Aegis system has successfully engaged 14 times in this deployment alone. The Combat Information Center's initial assessment, 91% intercept probability, single contact, clean ballistic trajectory, a familiar problem with a proven solution. And that familiarity is, again, entirely the point. Because what the fire control radar cannot distinguish from a standard warhead section, what reads on every sensor in the formation as a standard warhead section is a forward body that is hollow, not solid explosive fill, a hollow dispenser carrying 64 self-guided submunitions, each with its own shape, charge, and terminal guidance. Designed to be released at 42,000 feet in a precisely controlled vertical pattern that rains directly onto the flight deck from directly overhead. From the one quadrant that the Aegis engagement architecture was not designed to defend against at scale, not because of any failure of American engineering, because the geometry of a ballistic missile defense system is built around lateral intercept, around the kinematic reality that missiles come from out there and travel toward. Here, not from directly above at terminal velocity. The thermal signature of the hollow dispenser section reads 3.8 degrees below the baseline of every Iranian missile in the Washington's engagement library, 3.8 degrees. That is the entire margin between a weapon this ship has destroyed 14 times and a weapon engineered to kill it using its own defensive instincts. One deck below the Combat Information Center, in the passive infrared tracking suite, Petty Officer First Class Amara Diallo is looking at that number and writing it down in a notebook she was never asked to keep. 19 months of Iranian ballistic missile thermal signatures, self-compiled, cross-referenced, and updated after every engagement, a library that exists entirely because she decided 2 deployments ago that the official signature databases were updated too slowly and she could do better. The warhead section is reading 3.8 degrees cold. She picks up the circuit. She is told her assessment has been logged. The contact is at 68,000 feet and descending. She does not argue. She goes back to her display and keeps working, because being told to stand by is not the same as being told to stop thinking. In the 29 seconds before the missile reaches her calculated dispersion altitude, she builds unasked, unsanctioned, entirely on her own initiative a Sea Sparrow pre-positioning solution for vertical overhead engagement, because she has already understood what the Combat Information Center has not yet processed, that if she is right, the SM-6 climbing toward a textbook perfect intercept is about to deliver 64 armed submunitions directly above the flight deck from an angle the ship cannot adequately defend. The contact is at 44,000 feet. She picks up the circuit again. She is not asking anyone to cancel the intercept. She is asking for something specific. A retask of the SM-6 from 42,000 feet to 39,500, 2,500 feet lower. Not enough to miss enough to detonate the dispenser before it reaches its release altitude, so that whatever submunitions survive do so in a disrupted, partially destroyed scatter rather than a controlled vertical deployment. Lieutenant Commander Priya Anand in the Combat Information Center looks at the data. She looks at the timestamp showing Diallo has been tracking this thermal anomaly since the moment of launch. She has run this engagement solution 14 times. It has worked 14 times. She retasks the SM-6 at 0954 and 17 seconds. The rebuilt fire control solution locks with 12 seconds to spare. The missile is destroyed at 39,700 feet. Of the 64 submunitions, 38 are destroyed in the detonation and sympathetic explosions. 26 survive in damaged condition. Diallo's pre-positioned Sea Sparrow engages 9 of those whose trajectories bring them within the formation's defensive perimeter. 6 are destroyed. 3 get through guidance to degraded to track properly and detonate in the ocean within 150 meters of the formation. 1 detonates 61 meters from the hull of an escort frigate. 4 crew members are injured. The Washington is untouched. Iran had fired the most carefully architected weapon in its inventory, a missile designed not to outrun American defenses, but to use them to let Aegis do exactly what Aegis does, perfectly, at precisely the wrong moment, and it would have worked every element of the operational concept. Functioned exactly as intended, every Iranian engineer's calculation was correct. Right up until a petty officer first class working from a notebook nobody asked her to keep picked up a circuit twice and reported that the warhead section was reading 3.8 degrees too cold. The launcher is destroyed at 1044. Diallo's complete thermal signature library, 19 months of data, including 11 Iranian missile variants that had never been formally documented, is transmitted to every passive infrared operator in the theater within the hour. The lesson does not require elaboration. The most consequential intelligence asset in the formation was not the radar array, not the satellite uplink, not the layered algorithmic architecture of the Aegis combat system. It was the sailor who spent 19 months building knowledge that her institution had never thought to ask for. We are barely past the midpoint of this morning. What follows a semi-submersible strike craft operating on a 6-year pre-planned approach route, a warhead variant designed to defeat every active defense system on the ship, and a detection method built entirely around measuring acoustic absence will require you to discard everything. You think you understand about the relationship between technological dominance and genuine strategic security. Stay with me. The semi-submersible contact that Chief Petty Officer Dominic Ferrara identifies at 1019 does not appear on any radar screen. It sits 94% below the waterline, drawing a radar cross-section smaller than a floating crate, generating engine noise calibrated to fall below the threshold of the formations. Passive detection systems. It has been running on a pre-planned approach corridor for 6 years, a route surveyed, mapped, and refined before this deployment began, before this crew was assembled, possibly before some of them had completed basic training. It would have reached its firing position at 600 meters, 6 missiles, sub 3-second flight time. The mathematics were designed to be unsurvivable. It failed because Ferrara noticed that the passive acoustic picture in a specific 40-meter radius was too clean, not louder than expected, not alarming in any conventional sense, quieter. A circle of suppressed ambient noise, the specific acoustic shadow produced by a large, slow-moving object engineered to minimize its own signature. Tracking in precise correlation with the carrier's movement for 72 hours. He filed a report on the first day he noticed it. Someone acted on it within 4 hours. The semi-submersible was interdicted at 1800 meters. One missile was successfully fired before the vessel was neutralized. It impacted the hull above the waterline. 11 injured, significant but manageable structural damage. The Washington remained operational. What this entire morning demonstrates across every engagement, every weapon, every layer of an Iranian operational concept that was clearly designed as a unified system rather than a sequence of independent attacks is a single truth that Western strategic institutions are constitutionally resistant to naming. The most dangerous vulnerability of the most powerful naval force ever assembled is not technological, it is epistemological. It is the distance between what systems are designed to know and what individual human beings, watching carefully and building knowledge without permission, actually understand. Iran came closer than any official narrative will ever comfortably acknowledge. 3 times, across 3 different weapon systems, the margin was measured not in kilometers but in seconds and degrees and acoustic frequencies. And 3 times, what stood between the George Washington and catastrophic damage was not hardware or doctrine or the institutional weight of American naval tradition. It was 3 sailors who refused to stop paying attention. That is the lesson that the Gulf of Oman produced that morning. It belongs not to admirals or defense contractors or strategic theorists. It belongs to anyone who still believes that the most dangerous threats always arrive with a warning. They do not. The most dangerous threats arrive at 3.5 knots, in a straight line, in the dark, labeled non-threatening by every system designed to know better. And the only question that matters is whether there is someone in the room who keeps watching anyway.